Let me take you to a bitterly cold room in Pembroke Castle, winter of 1457. The candles gutter low, the air is sharp with fear. And at the center of this chaos, a midwife is fighting a losing battle. But this isn't just any child. This is Margaret Beaufort, and before she's even heard her baby's cry, everyone in that icy room knows something grim. Margaret Beaufort should not have been pregnant. Not at this age. Not this way. For the next few minutes, I want you to stay with me. Not just for grim medieval drama, but because this story has been polished and prettified by centuries of historians. The reality? It's far darker. It's not just about odd marriage customs or curious old laws. It's about a system that mangled a child, body and mind, while all of England's elite looked the other way. It's about a girl who was devoured by the ambitions of men, and then, by sheer force, became one of history's most formidable women. And as disturbing as all this sounds, here's the twist. Margaret's ordeal wasn't an isolated tragedy. It happened again and again. Let's turn back the clock to May 31st, 1443. Imagine Bletsoe Castle, Bedfordshire. A baby girl is born at dawn, tiny and pink, and her name is Margaret. But barely has she taken her first breath before she's transformed. Not into someone's daughter, but into property. Her father, John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, is prestigious and powerful. That doesn't save him. Less than a year later, he's dead under suspicious circumstances. The whispers go, suicide. A shattering disgrace in medieval England, enough to tarnish the whole family. Now, baby Margaret isn't just a precious heir. She's bait. The vultures descend. Lords and noblemen see not a toddler in a nursery, but a living treasure chest. Lands, titles, more money than most could dream of, all wrapped up in a child rocking in her cradle. Her mother, Margaret Beauchamp, tries to shield her. She keeps the girl close, gives her an excellent education, reading French, writing with a sharp, quick mind. For a moment, it almost seems as if things might turn out all right. But then comes King Henry VI, one of the most pious, weak-willed kings in English history. He hands Margaret off, like a trinket, to the Duke of Suffolk, William de la Pole. Suffolk is quick. He marries 3-year-old Margaret to his own 7-year-old son. Yes, you heard that right. You can almost imagine a child bride, probably not even able to say the vows, fidgeting in unfamiliar finery. Why the rush? Greed. And the church obliged just as quickly, issuing the necessary papal dispensation because, of course, powerful families are always mysteriously exceptions. But Suffolk's fortune changes overnight. He's arrested, murdered, and just like that, little Margaret's back on the marriage market again. And what happens next will haunt her and history forever. King Henry VI, perhaps seeing an opportunity, or perhaps simply not caring, gives Margaret to the Tudor brothers, Edmund and Jasper. The Tudors had royal blood but humble beginnings, and Edmund, aged 24, saw in 12-year-old Margaret not a frightened girl, but a vault to be broken open, a way to wealth and status. She was married to him on November 1st, 1455. 12 years old. He was twice her age. Now, here's something many people don't realize. Even in the medieval world, where child marriages were arranged for dynastic reasons, It was widely understood you waited to consummate the marriage until the bride was 14, sometimes older, not because they cared about a girl's feelings, but because the consequences of pregnancy in a body that young were lethal. They'd seen the bodies. They knew the risks. But Edmund Tudor didn't care. He forced himself on Margaret, not just unlawfully, but in a way that terrified even his contemporaries. Margaret simply wasn't old enough, physically or emotionally. But for Edmund, that didn't matter. Legally, he stood to gain everything if she died in childbirth after producing an heir. Her wealth would be his forever. By April 1456, Margaret is pregnant, barely 12. Can you picture it? A child, her bones and joints not yet finished forming, enduring the nausea, the terror, the confusion of pregnancy. And then, before her baby even comes, fate twists again. Edmund is captured by Yorkists, thrown into prison, and dies soon after, officially of plague. Instead, she embarks on a grueling, dangerous journey through war-torn England to Pembroke Castle, seeking protection from her brother-in-law. It's winter, the roads are treacherous, and she's heavily pregnant. No one would have blamed a grown woman for staying put. But Margaret was made of iron. And yet, even that steel couldn't save her from what came next. January 28th, 1457. Margaret goes into labor. It's immediately clear this is not a routine birth. Details are scarce, but what little we do know, haunting. Margaret survived somehow, but she was so gravely injured, so physically devastated, that she would never bear another child, despite remarrying twice more. For a noblewoman in this era, that was almost unthinkable. Most women of Margaret's status had a dozen children. She had one, and just barely. That one child was Henry, who would become Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor Dynasty. But don't be fooled by the celebratory histories. Margaret's survival and Henry's came at an excruciating, lifelong cost. John Fisher, Margaret's closest confidant and priest, said years later it was nothing less than a miracle that might, with a little more compassion, never have been necessary in the first place. Thanks to modern medicine, we now understand what Margaret likely went through. A blocked birth canal, crushing internal injuries, perhaps permanent scarring and nerve damage. That's if she avoided infection, which was common and deadly. The psychological wounds? Impossible to measure. Imagine, orphaned, abused, widowed, traumatized, all before your 14th birthday. So when people say Margaret Beaufort doted on her only son, almost to the point of obsession, well, it's not so mysterious. Henry was not just her child. He was her only living proof that she had survived the unsurvivable. Here's something people rarely talk about. Margaret never stopped fighting that fate, for herself or for those around her. When, decades later, her granddaughter Margaret Tudor was engaged to the King of Scotland when she too was young, Margaret Beaufort tried desperately to stop the marriage, or at least delay its consummation. She had learned the hardest lesson imaginable, and she fought to spare her granddaughter the same horror. But the machinery of power rolled on. Politics won out. Young Margaret Tudor was sent to Scotland, married at 13, a repeat of her grandmother's suffering. The cycle persisted. That's what makes this story more than mere tragedy. It reveals a system, one that commodified girls, traded them like livestock for the ambitions of men. Even when those like Margaret tried to stop it, they so rarely succeeded. The very trauma that created the Tudor dynasty was brushed aside, sanitized, dressed up as a great rise to power. These days, historians sometimes try to soften this narrative. It was another era, they say. Different attitudes, different norms. But here's what they miss. Even then, people knew this was wrong. Most families waited until at least 14 to consummate marriages. Contracts often spelled it out. What Edmund Tudor did, forcing himself on his 12-year-old bride, was considered shocking, even in his own time. But as always, power prevailed, and nothing was done. Margaret is remembered now as founder of colleges, patron of scholars, kingmaker, and political genius. Christ's and St. John's colleges at Cambridge, her legacy. But none of those honors can erase the original wound carved into her life. Margaret outlived 4 husbands, outmaneuvered enemies, and shepherded her son to the throne. She signed her letters Margaret R., the R hinting at royal power few women dared claim. But beneath all the grandeur remained the broken body and bruised spirit of the girl who had survived a birth that should have killed her. We remember Henry VIII's drama, Elizabeth's golden age. But what about the frightened child who delivered the dynasty? Every glorious portrait of the Tudors is haunted by her cries. Every English rose, red or white, blooms against a backdrop of that suffering. And as appalling as it is, Margaret's story isn't ancient history everywhere. Margaret Beaufort didn't choose her fate, but she endured it, and, heartbreakingly, couldn't even save her own granddaughter from the same ordeal. Maybe that's why her story matters now more than ever. We have the power to do what her protectors could not. Say enough. A 12-year-old deserves childhood, not politics and pain. So next time you see that famous Tudor portrait, remember this. Their greatness was built on the body and bravery of a child, forced to make kings out of her own survival. If this story has shaken you, if you believe that history can and should teach us more than just dates and battles, let's talk about it. What struck you hardest about Margaret Beaufort's ordeal? Share your thoughts below. And if you want more hidden, unvarnished tales like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your voice helps keep these stories alive. Because shining a light on the forgotten, the broken, and the brave, that's how we honor history and maybe, just maybe, change the future.